The desert sun beat down mercilessly as Jake Mitchell wiped sweat from his forehead. He had been hiking alone through the Arizona wilderness for 3 days, following an old mining trail his grandfather had mentioned in his journal. Jake was a 32-year-old geologist from Denver, taking a much-needed break from his corporate job to explore the rugged terrain his grandfather once called home. The silence of the desert was broken only by the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. Jake had always found peace in nature, away from the noise and stress of city life. His backpack contained enough supplies for 5 days, though he planned to be back to his truck by tomorrow evening. The GPS on his phone showed he was still on track, following the faded markers left by miners decades ago. As he crested a small ridge, something unusual caught his eye. In the distance, near a cluster of red rocks, he saw what looked like a person lying motionless on the ground. Jake's heart rate quickened as he adjusted his binoculars. It was definitely a woman, and she wasn't moving. Without hesitation, he began jogging toward the figure, his hiking boots crunching against the gravel and sand. When he reached her, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The woman appeared to be in her mid-20s, with long black hair spread around her head like a dark halo. Her skin was deeply tanned, and she wore traditional Native American clothing, a beaded leather dress and moccasins. More concerning was the large gash on her forehead and the way her left leg was twisted at an odd angle. She was unconscious but breathing, though very weakly. Jake immediately dropped his backpack and knelt beside her. His first aid training from his college outdoor club kicked in as he checked her pulse. It was rapid but steady. The head wound looked serious but had stopped bleeding, though it was caked with dried blood and sand. Her leg was definitely broken, possibly in multiple places. Dehydration was also a major concern given the desert heat and the fact that she had no water bottle or supplies nearby. Looking around, Jake tried to piece together what had happened. About 50 feet away, he noticed disturbed earth and rocks, suggesting she might have fallen from the rocky outcrop above. There were no tire tracks or signs of other people, which meant she had likely been hiking alone when the accident occurred. The question was how long she had been lying here. Hours or possibly even a day or more. Jake quickly set up a makeshift shelter using his emergency tarp to provide shade. He carefully moved her into the shadow, being extra cautious not to worsen her leg injury. Using his water bottle, he gently cleaned the wound on her forehead and applied antiseptic from his first aid kit. The woman stirred slightly but remained unconscious. Her lips were cracked and dry, clear signs of severe dehydration. He tried to give her small sips of water, letting it drip slowly between her lips. Some of the water ran down her chin, but he noticed her throat muscles responding slightly. This gave him hope that she might regain consciousness soon. Jake also used his spare shirt to create a splint for her leg, though he knew she would need proper medical attention as quickly as possible. The problem was their location. They were at least 15 miles from the nearest road, and Jake's cell phone showed no signal. His emergency GPS beacon was back in his truck, which seemed like a foolish mistake now. The terrain between here and his vehicle was rough and would be impossible to navigate while carrying an injured person, especially with her broken leg. As the afternoon wore on, Jake made the difficult decision to stay with the woman rather than leave her to seek help. The desert temperature would drop significantly at night, and in her condition, she might not survive if left alone. He rationed his remaining water carefully, continuing to give her small amounts while staying hydrated himself. When evening approached, the woman's eyes fluttered open for the first time. She looked confused and frightened, speaking in a language Jake didn't recognize but assumed was Apache. Her dark eyes were filled with pain, but also surprise at seeing a stranger caring for her. Jake spoke softly, trying to reassure her even though she might not understand English. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're hurt, but you're safe now. I'm going to help you." He pointed to himself and said, "Jake?" then gestured to her questioningly. She watched him carefully for a long moment before whispering something that sounded like, "Ayana." Jake repeated the name, and she nodded slightly, wincing from the pain the movement caused. Throughout the night, Jake stayed awake, monitoring her condition and keeping her warm with his sleeping bag. He built a small fire using dry brush and the emergency fire starter from his pack. The flames provided not only warmth but also a signal that might be visible to any search and rescue teams, though he doubted anyone knew either of them was missing yet. Ayana drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes speaking in her native language, other times just moaning in pain. Jake did his best to keep her comfortable, adjusting her position carefully and continuing to give her water whenever she was awake. He found himself studying her face in the firelight, noting the strong features and the intricate beadwork on her dress. She was beautiful, but more than that, there was something about her presence that made him feel strangely connected to this place and moment. As dawn broke over the desert, Jake faced a critical decision. Ayana's condition seemed stable, but she needed medical attention soon. Her leg was clearly broken, and he worried about internal injuries from what appeared to be a significant fall. The nearest hospital was probably 40 miles away, but first he had to figure out how to get them both out of this remote location. Jake checked his map again, noting a small dirt road that ran closer to their current position than his original route. If he could somehow get Ayana to that road, they might have a better chance of being found by passing vehicles or a rescue team. It would mean a difficult journey carrying her across rough terrain, but staying put much longer wasn't an option. Little did Jake know that this decision would change both their lives forever, setting in motion events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about fate, culture, and love. Jake spent the early morning hours preparing for what would be the most challenging trek of his life. Using his hiking poles and emergency rope, he constructed a makeshift stretcher from his sleeping bag and backpack frame. Ayana watched him work, her dark eyes following his every movement. Though she spoke little English, she seemed to understand that he was trying to help her reach safety. The plan was to carry her to the dirt road he had spotted on his map, roughly 3 miles away through rocky terrain. It wasn't ideal, but staying put meant certain death for Ayana, whose condition seemed to be slowly worsening despite his care. Her fever had started during the night, and Jake worried about infection setting in from her head wound. Before they began the journey, Ayana managed to communicate something important. She pointed to herself, then to the direction of some distant mountains, and said, "Apache," several times. Jake realized she was trying to tell him about her people, her tribe. She seemed concerned about something beyond just her own welfare, gesturing repeatedly toward the mountains and speaking urgently in her native language. Jake wished desperately that he could understand her. She appeared to be in her early 20s, but there was a wisdom in her eyes that suggested she held an important position within her community. The quality of her clothing, with its intricate beadwork and fine leather, indicated she wasn't just any tribal member. The silver and turquoise jewelry she wore looked ancient and valuable, possibly passed down through generations. The trek began slowly and carefully. Jake had fashioned straps that allowed him to pull the makeshift stretcher behind him, while using his hands for balance on the rocky terrain. Every few hundred yards, he stopped to check on Ayana and give her water. The desert sun was already becoming brutal, and sweat poured down his face as he navigated around boulders and through narrow passages between rock formations. Ayana never complained. Even though Jake could see the pain etched on her face with every bump and jostle, she clutched a small leather pouch that hung around her neck, occasionally whispering what sounded like prayers or chants. Jake found himself deeply moved by her strength and dignity in the face of such adversity. About halfway to the road, they encountered their first major obstacle. A wash that had been carved by flash floods blocked their path, requiring them to descend into a rocky ravine and climb back up the other side. Jake knew this would be extremely difficult with the stretcher, but there was no way around it. He carefully lowered Ayana down into the wash, then climbed down himself to help her across the sandy bottom. For the first time since finding her, she was able to stand briefly, leaning heavily on his shoulder. As they made their way across the wash, Jake felt a strange sensation, as if they were being watched. He looked around but saw nothing except the usual desert wildlife, a lizard scurrying across a rock, birds circling overhead. What Jake didn't notice were the 3 Apache men positioned on the ridge above them. They had been tracking Ayana since she failed to return from her vision quest 2 days earlier. These were her brother Takota, her cousin Nalnish, and an elder named Ahiga who served as a spiritual leader for their band. They had watched Jake's rescue efforts through the night and were now observing his careful treatment of their medicine woman with growing respect and amazement. Ahiga, in particular, was deeply moved by what he witnessed. In Apache tradition, a vision quest was a sacred journey undertaken alone to seek spiritual guidance. Ayana, as one of their most gifted healers and spiritual leaders, had gone into the desert to receive visions about her future role in the tribe. Her accident and subsequent rescue by this white stranger was being interpreted by the elder as something far more significant than mere chance. Jake continued his laborious journey, unaware that he was being watched and evaluated. The climb out of the wash proved even more challenging than expected. He had to secure Ayana to the stretcher and essentially haul her up the rocky slope using his climbing rope. By the time they reached the top, both were exhausted and Jake's hands were bloody from gripping the rough rock. But their efforts were rewarded when they finally reached the dirt road. Jake immediately saw tire tracks indicating that vehicles did occasionally use this route. He positioned Ayana in whatever shade he could find and began preparing signal fires at both ends of a straight stretch of road. Using green branches and leaves from his emergency kit, he created smoke that would be visible from a considerable distance. While they waited, something remarkable happened. Ayana, despite her injuries and fever, began to teach Jake some Apache words. She pointed to the sun and said, "Sha," to the rocks and said, "Tse," to water, and said, "Tu." Jake found himself completely captivated by her voice and the musical quality of her language. When she smiled at his clumsy pronunciation, he felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the desert heat. As the afternoon wore on, Ayana shared more about herself through gestures and the few English words she knew. She indicated that she was a healer, pointing to various plants growing nearby and demonstrating their uses. She showed him how to identify which cactus fruits were safe to eat and which roots could be used for medicine. Despite being the one who needed help, she was still trying to teach and care for others. Jake began to understand that finding Ayana wasn't just about saving a life. It was about discovering a completely different way of viewing the world. Her connection to the land, her spiritual approach to healing, and her calm acceptance of both pain and help challenged everything he thought he knew about strength and wisdom. Just as the sun was beginning to set, they heard the distant sound of an engine. A pickup truck appeared on the horizon, traveling slowly along the rough road. Jake jumped up and waved his arms frantically while the smoke from his signal fires billowed in the evening breeze. The truck, driven by a local rancher named Carlos who occasionally checked on his cattle in the area, pulled to a stop. Carlos, a weathered man in his 50s who had lived in the region his entire life, took one look at Ayana and immediately understood the gravity of the situation. He recognized her traditional Apache clothing and knew enough about the local tribes to realize she was someone important. Without asking many questions, he helped Jake load her carefully into the truck bed, where they made her as comfortable as possible for the ride to town. During the bumpy ride to the nearest medical facility, Ayana reached out and took Jake's hand. Her grip was weak but determined, and she looked directly into his eyes. In broken English, she whispered, "Thank you. My life. Yours now?" Jake didn't fully understand what she meant, but he felt the weight and significance of her words. Unknown to both of them, the three Apache men had witnessed this moment from their hidden vantage point, and Elder Ahiga nodded knowingly. According to ancient Apache tradition, when someone saves your life in such circumstances, a sacred bond is created that extends far beyond simple gratitude. The small hospital in Flagstaff was not equipped for major trauma, but it was enough to stabilize Ayana's condition. Jake paced the waiting room while doctors worked on her broken leg and treated her head injury. He had given the medical staff all the information he could, though he realized how little he actually knew about the woman he had saved. The hospital staff seemed surprised that an Apache woman had been found so far from any known tribal lands. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the attending physician, approached Jake after several hours. "She's going to be okay," she said with relief. "The leg fracture is clean and should heal well with proper care. The head injury was more serious than it initially appeared. She has a mild concussion and will need monitoring for the next few days. You probably saved her life by keeping her hydrated and getting her here when you did." Jake felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. He had been carrying the responsibility of Ayana's survival since finding her, and now professional medical care would take over. But instead of feeling free to leave, he found himself reluctant to go. Something about this woman had captured his attention in a way he couldn't explain. "Can I see her?" he asked. Dr. Martinez nodded. "She's been asking for you." That's actually quite unusual. Most Apache patients prefer to have only family members nearby, but she specifically requested the man who found her. She keeps saying something in Apache that our interpreter thinks means life giver, or chosen one. When Jake entered Ayana's room, she was propped up in bed with her leg in a cast and bandages around her head. Despite her injuries, she looked more alert and focused than she had since he found her. Her dark eyes lit up when she saw him, and she extended her hand toward him. "You stay," she said in careful English. "Please." Jake pulled a chair beside her bed. "I'm not going anywhere until you're better," he assured her. Over the next 3 days, while Ayana recovered in the hospital, an extraordinary thing happened. Jake found himself spending every visiting hour at her bedside, and their communication improved dramatically. Ayana was intelligent and determined to learn more English, while Jake picked up Apache words and phrases. They used a combination of both languages, gestures, and drawings to share their stories. Jake learned that Ayana was indeed a medicine woman, one of the youngest ever recognized by her tribe. She had been on a vision quest, a sacred spiritual journey, when she fell from the cliff. She told him that in her culture, vision quests sometimes included receiving signs about one's future path, and she believed their meeting was part of the vision she was meant to receive. "In Dream Before Fall," she explained carefully in her improving English, "I see man with light eyes who brings me to new understanding. You have light eyes. You bring me from darkness to light." Jake was moved by her interpretation, though he didn't fully grasp its significance in Apache culture. What he did understand was that he felt more connected to another person than he ever had before. Ayana possessed a combination of strength, wisdom, and gentleness that challenged his preconceptions about both women and Native American culture. On the 4th morning, Jake arrived at the hospital to find Ayana's room empty. Panic shot through him until a nurse explained that she had been discharged into the care of her family, who had finally located her. The nurse handed him a note written in Ayana's careful handwriting. "Come to Red Rock Canyon Sunday when sun is highest. Follow the eagle." Jake spent the rest of the week thinking about the note and what it might mean. He researched Red Rock Canyon and discovered it was about 40 miles north of where he had found Ayana. The area was known to be significant to local Apache tribes, but it was mostly on public land that anyone could access. Sunday arrived clear and hot. Jake drove his truck as far as he could up the rough road leading toward Red Rock Canyon, then hiked the final 2 miles. As he crested a small hill, he saw them. At least 20 Apache people gathered in a clearing near a distinctive red sandstone formation. The group included men, women, and children of various ages, all dressed in traditional clothing. At the center of the group, Jake spotted Ayana. She was seated on a beautiful woven blanket, her injured leg extended in front of her, but she looked radiant and healthy. When she saw him approaching, her face broke into a brilliant smile. An elderly man with long gray hair and deeply weathered features stepped forward. He wore an elaborate headdress and carried a staff decorated with feathers and beads. This was Elder Ahiga, though Jake didn't yet know his name or significance. "You are the one called Jake," the elder said in clear, accented English. "I am Ahiga. We have been waiting for you." Jake felt confused and slightly overwhelmed. "I don't understand." "Waiting for me?" Ahiga smiled and gestured for Jake to join the circle of people. "Ayana told us what you did in the desert, how you saved her life, stayed with her through the night, carried her to safety. In our tradition, such an act creates a sacred bond, but there is more to this story than you know." As Jake sat down near Ayana, Elder Ahiga began to explain. "We followed you both during the rescue. We watched how you cared for her, how gentle you were, how you put her needs before your own safety. This was not the action of a stranger. This was the action of someone chosen." Ayana took Jake's hand and spoke in a mixture of Apache and English, with Ahiga translating the parts Jake couldn't understand. She explained that her vision quest had indeed shown her a man who would play an important role in her life, and the life of her people. She had seen someone who would bridge 2 worlds, helping her tribe adapt to changing times while preserving their traditions. "When someone saves an Apache life as you did," Ahiga continued, "especially the life of a medicine woman during a vision quest, it is seen as a sign from the spirits. You were brought to her not by accident but by destiny." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him, some curious, some welcoming, some still cautious. He felt completely out of his depth, but also strangely at home. "What does this mean exactly?" he asked. Ayana squeezed his hand and spoke in careful English. "It means you are welcome among us. It means the spirits have chosen you as someone who can help our people. And it means," she paused, looking directly into his eyes, "that if you are willing, I would like you to stay and learn our ways, to become part of our family." The weight of what she was suggesting hit Jake like a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about friendship or even romance. She was talking about him joining her tribe, becoming part of Apache society, learning their ways, and contributing to their community. It was an offer that would change his entire life path. As if reading his thoughts, Ahiga added, "This is not a decision to make lightly. We offer this because the spirits have shown us you have a good heart and strong character. But choosing to walk the Apache path means leaving much of your old life behind. Take time to think. The desert teaches patience." Jake looked at Ayana, whose expression was hopeful but patient. He realized that in saving her life, he had unknowingly set in motion events that were challenging him to consider a completely different future than anything he had ever imagined. The question was whether he had the courage to embrace it. Jake returned to his hotel in Flagstaff that night with his mind spinning. The offer from Ayana and her tribe was unlike anything he had ever imagined possible. He sat on his bed, staring at the business cards in his wallet, his job as a senior geologist at a Denver consulting firm, his apartment lease, his entire carefully planned urban life. Everything seemed foreign now compared to the profound connection he felt to Ayana and her people. He spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the decision. His rational mind told him he was crazy to even consider abandoning his career and modern life for a woman he had known for only a week. But his heart kept returning to the moment when Ayana had looked into his eyes and said his life was connected to hers. There was something about her strength, wisdom, and the way she saw the world that made his previous existence feel empty and meaningless. On Thursday morning, Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. He called his boss in Denver and requested an extended leave of absence, citing personal reasons. Then he drove back toward Red Rock Canyon, following the directions Ayana had given him to reach her tribal community. The Apache settlement was located in a beautiful valley surrounded by red cliffs and dotted with traditional dwellings alongside some modern structures. As Jake's truck approached, children ran alongside the road, curious about the visitor. He was directed to Elder Ahiga's home, where he found Ayana waiting for him on the porch, her injured leg propped up but looking much stronger. "I was hoping you would come back," she said with a smile that made his heart skip. "I can't stop thinking about what you said," Jake admitted. "About being chosen, about having a role here. I don't understand it all, but I want to learn." Elder Ahiga emerged from the house and nodded approvingly. "The spirits speak loudest to those who listen with their hearts rather than their minds. You have made a wise choice to explore this path. But first, you must understand what you are choosing." Over the following weeks, Jake began what Ahiga called his education in Apache ways. He was given a small cabin on the edge of the community and started learning everything from Apache language and history to traditional survival skills and spiritual practices. Ayana, despite still recovering from her injuries, became his primary teacher and guide. Jake discovered that Ayana held a position of great respect within the tribe. At only 24, she was recognized as a powerful medicine woman with gifts for healing both physical ailments and spiritual troubles. Her accident during the Vision Quest had been particularly significant because she had been seeking guidance about how to help her people face modern challenges while preserving their ancient traditions. "Many of our young people leave for the cities," she explained one evening as they sat by a fire outside her grandmother's house. "They forget the old ways, lose connection to the land and the spirits. We need bridges between the old world and the new world. I believe you could be such a bridge." As Jake's understanding of Apache culture deepened, he began to see how his background as a geologist could actually be valuable to the tribe. Their reservation lands contained mineral rights that could be developed, but they needed someone who understood both the technical aspects and their spiritual connection to the land. Jake found himself uniquely positioned to help them navigate these complex decisions. His relationship with Ayana also deepened during this time. What had begun as gratitude and curiosity evolved into genuine love and partnership. Jake was amazed by her knowledge of medicinal plants, her ability to read the subtle signs of weather and season changes, and her intuitive understanding of human nature. She in turn was fascinated by his scientific knowledge and his genuine respect for her culture. The tribal council, led by Elder Ahiga, watched Jake's progress with careful attention. Apache society was traditionally very protective of their customs and suspicious of outsiders, but Jake's sincere efforts to learn and his obvious devotion to Ayanna gradually won over even the most skeptical members. The real test came after 2 months when Ayanna's leg had fully healed, and she was ready to resume her full duties as a medicine woman. A young boy named Tommy from a neighboring Apache band had been brought to her with a mysterious illness that had baffled both tribal healers and modern doctors. The child was weak, couldn't keep food down, and seemed to be wasting away despite all efforts to help him. Ayanna spent days using traditional diagnostic methods, reading signs in the child's energy, consulting with spirit guides, and examining the circumstances surrounding his illness. Jake watched in fascination as she worked, beginning to understand how her healing methods addressed not just physical symptoms, but spiritual and emotional factors as well. "I think the sickness is not in his body, but in his spirit," Ayanna finally concluded. "Something has frightened him deeply, broken his connection to his life force, but I cannot find the source." Jake, who had been quietly observing, asked if he could examine the boy's home environment. Using his geological training, he tested the water sources and soil around the family's dwelling. What he discovered shocked everyone. The family's well had been contaminated by runoff from an old abandoned mine, exposing the child to heavy metals that were slowly poisoning him. The combination of Ayanna's spiritual diagnosis and Jake's scientific investigation provided a complete picture. The boy was indeed spiritually troubled because his body was being poisoned, creating a cycle of physical and emotional distress. With proper medical treatment for the metal poisoning and Ayanna's spiritual healing to restore his sense of safety and connection, Tommy began to recover within days. This successful collaboration between traditional Apache healing and modern scientific knowledge created a sensation throughout the tribal communities. Word spread quickly about the medicine woman and her chosen partner, who could heal both body and spirit using the wisdom of 2 worlds. Elder Ahiga called a special council meeting to discuss what had happened. "This is exactly what Ayanna saw in her vision," he announced to the assembled tribal leaders. "A man who would help our people bridge the old ways and the new ways. The spirits brought Jake to us for this purpose." The council's decision was unanimous. They formally invited Jake to become a permanent member of their community with full rights and responsibilities. But there was one condition that would make his acceptance complete and binding according to Apache tradition. "If you wish to truly become one of our people," Ahiga explained, "and if Ayanna is willing, you should be joined to her as husband and wife according to our customs. This would make you not just a friend of the Apache, but family. It would give you the standing to speak for our interests in the outside world, and to help guide our decisions about how to use our land and resources." Jake looked at Ayanna, who had been quietly listening to the entire discussion. She met his eyes with a steady gaze that held both love and a question. "Is this what you want?" she asked softly. "To be Apache? To be my husband? To help our people find their way in the changing world?" Jake felt the weight of the moment. Everything in his life had led to this choice, between his old existence in Denver and a new life that promised purpose, love, and connection to something larger than himself. He thought about his corporate job, his apartment, his predictable routine, and realized that none of it mattered compared to what was being offered here. "Yes," he said firmly. "This is exactly what I want." The celebration that followed would mark the beginning of a new chapter not just for Jake and Ayanna, but for their entire community as they prepared to face the future with the strength of both ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. The Apache wedding ceremony took place during the full moon of October, exactly 6 months after Jake had found Ayanna in the desert. The entire tribal community gathered in the sacred canyon, where they had first met as a group. Jake had spent weeks preparing for this day. learning the traditional songs and participating in purification rituals that would prepare him to take on the responsibilities of an Apache husband and tribal member. Elder Ahiga led the ceremony, which began before dawn with prayers and the burning of sacred herbs. Jake wore traditional Apache clothing that Ayana's grandmother had sewn for him, a beautifully decorated shirt and leggings made from soft deerskin. Ayana looked radiant in a white doeskin dress that had been worn by the women in her family for generations, its intricate beadwork telling the story of her lineage. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Rather than simply exchanging vows, the Apache tradition required the couple to demonstrate their commitment through a series of symbolic actions. They shared food to show they would provide for each other, exchanged gifts to represent the blending of their possessions and families, and participated in a ritual where their hands were bound together with sacred rope while they spoke their promises in both English and Apache. "I promise to honor the old ways while building bridges to the new," Jake said and carefully practiced Apache words. "I promise to protect our people, our land, and our traditions. I promise to walk beside you as your partner in healing both our community and the world beyond." Ayana's vows were equally moving. "I promise to teach you the ways of our ancestors and learn from your knowledge of the modern world. I promise to heal with you, dream with you, and help you find your true Apache name. I promise to be your wife, your partner in medicine, and your guide as you become fully one of our people." When Elder Ahiga pronounced them husband and wife according to Apache law, the celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Jake was overwhelmed by the warmth and acceptance shown by the entire community. People who had been cautious and distant when he first arrived now embraced him as family. Children who had watched him curiously for months now ran up to him, calling him Uncle Jake and asking him to tell stories about the outside world, but the real work of their partnership began after the celebration ended. News of their unique collaboration had spread throughout the network of Apache communities in the region, and requests began arriving for their help with various problems. Some were medical issues where Ayana's healing knowledge could be combined with Jake's understanding of environmental factors. Others were legal and business matters where the tribe needed someone who could navigate both traditional decision-making processes and modern bureaucracy. Their first major challenge came in November when a mining company approached the tribal council with an offer to lease mineral rights on reservation land. The company promised significant revenue that could fund education and healthcare programs, but many tribal members were concerned about environmental damage and the spiritual implications of disturbing sacred sites. Jake and Ayana worked together to thoroughly investigate the proposal. Jake used his geological expertise to assess the potential environmental impact, while Ayana consulted with elders and spiritual leaders about the cultural significance of the affected areas. They discovered that the proposed mining site included burial grounds and a traditional Vision Quest location that held deep spiritual meaning for their people. Rather than simply rejecting the mining proposal, they developed an alternative plan. Jake identified other areas of the reservation where mineral extraction could occur, with minimal environmental and cultural impact. They also negotiated terms that would give the tribe much more control over the mining operations and ensure that a significant portion of the profits would fund environmental restoration projects and cultural preservation programs. The success of this negotiation established Jake and Ayana as powerful advocates for their people. Word spread throughout the Native American community about the medicine woman and her geologist husband who could protect tribal interests while finding ways to generate income and opportunity. By spring, they had been invited to speak at conferences about sustainable development on tribal lands, and several other reservations had requested their help with similar challenges. Jake found himself working as a consultant, but now his expertise was being used to empower Native communities rather than to help corporations exploit natural resources. Ayana's reputation as a healer also continued to grow. Her combination of traditional medicine and modern understanding, enhanced by Jake's scientific perspective, proved remarkably effective. They began traveling to other reservations to treat difficult cases and train other healers in their integrated approach. During one of these trips, they encountered a situation that would test their partnership in unexpected ways. They had been called to a reservation in New Mexico, where several children were experiencing what doctors had diagnosed as an unusual form of anxiety disorder. The children were having nightmares, refusing to eat, and showing signs of deep depression. Ayana's initial spiritual assessment suggested that the children were sensing some kind of disturbance in the natural balance of their environment. Jake's investigation revealed that a nearby fracking operation was causing subtle ground vibrations and contaminating the local water supply with chemicals that could affect neurological development. But when they presented their findings to the tribal council, they met unexpected resistance. The tribe had signed a lucrative contract with the fracking company, and several tribal leaders had financial investments in the operation. They accused Jake of being an outside agitator, trying to interfere with tribal business decisions. This was the first time Jake had faced serious opposition from within the Native American community, and it shook his confidence. Some people questioned whether a white man, even one married to an Apache medicine woman, had the right to challenge decisions made by elected tribal leaders. Ayana stood firmly by Jake's findings, but the situation created tension within her own extended family. Her cousin, who served on the tribal council, accused her of being too influenced by her white husband and losing sight of what was best for Native people. The conflict came to a head during a heated community meeting where Jake was publicly challenged about his motives and his right to speak for Native interests. The moment was deeply painful for both Jake and Ayana, but it also provided an opportunity for Jake to define exactly what his role was in this community and why his voice mattered. "I don't speak for Apache people," Jake said to the packed meeting hall. "Only Apache people can speak for themselves. But I do speak for the children who are getting sick, for the land that is being poisoned, and for the future generations who will inherit whatever decisions we make today. My wife chose me not because I'm white or because I'm an outsider, but because the Spirit showed her that healing our world requires bringing together all the knowledge and wisdom we can find." He paused, looking directly at his critics. "I gave up everything in my old life because I believe in Ayana's vision of a future where traditional wisdom and modern knowledge work together. I can't change the color of my skin or the culture I was born into, but I can use whatever gifts I have to protect and serve the people who have accepted me as family." Ayana rose to stand beside her husband. "The spirits don't see skin color when they choose their instruments," she said quietly but firmly. "They see hearts that are willing to serve. Jake was brought to me when I was dying in the desert, and together we have healed many people and solved many problems. If you reject his help because of where he came from, you reject the wisdom of the spirits themselves." The room fell silent as the community grappled with this challenge to their preconceptions. Elder Ahiga, who had been listening carefully to the entire debate, finally stood to speak. His words would determine not just Jake and Ayana's future, but the direction of their entire community's approach to the changing world around them. Elder Ahiga's weathered hands gripped his walking stick as he rose slowly to address the packed meeting hall. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and every person present understood that his words would carry enormous weight in determining the outcome of this conflict. "I have lived through 8 decades on this earth," Ahiga began, his voice carrying the authority of his years and position. "I have seen our people struggle through times when we were forbidden to speak our language, practice our religion, or live according to our traditions. I have also seen us begin to reclaim our heritage and find ways to thrive in the modern world." He paused, his ancient eyes moving around the room, meeting the gaze of each person present. "When Ayana was called to undertake her vision quest 6 months ago, many of you thought she was too young to receive such important guidance. But the spirits do not operate according to our human schedules or expectations. They sent her a vision, and they sent her a helper to fulfill that vision." Ahiga's gaze settled on Jake and Ayana, who stood together facing the community. "Some of you question whether this white man has the right to speak about our affairs. But ask yourselves this. When our children were dying from poison in their water, did it matter what color skin the person had who identified the source? When our sacred sites were threatened by mining, did it matter who helped us find a solution that protected both our spirituality and our economic future?" The elder's voice grew stronger as he continued. "The spirits judge us not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our hearts, and the willingness of our souls to serve something greater than ourselves. Jake Mitchell gave up a comfortable life in the white world to serve our people. He learned our language, our customs, our ways of thinking, He married one of our most sacred daughters and has proven himself worthy of her trust. A murmur rippled through the crowd as people began nodding in agreement. Ahiga raised his hand for silence and continued. But more importantly, he and Ayana together have shown us a path forward. They have demonstrated that we do not have to choose between our ancient wisdom and modern knowledge. We can have both. We can use every tool available to us to protect our people, our land, and our future. The elder turned to address Jake directly. You came to us as a stranger, but you have become family. Not because you married one of our women, but because you have proven your commitment to our welfare time and again. Today I give you your true Apache name. You will be called Beshpa Goa, which means metal house in our language, because you have become a strong shelter for our people, protecting us from the storms of the modern world while keeping our traditions safe inside. The crowd erupted in surprised murmurs. For an elder to bestow an Apache name was a significant honor, one that officially recognized Jake as a full member of the tribe with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. But Ahiga wasn't finished. He turned to address the broader conflict about the fracking operation. As for the matter of the sick children, we must remember that our first responsibility is always to protect our young ones. Money is important, but what good is wealth if our children cannot drink clean water or breathe clean air? What good is prosperity today if it steals the future from our grandchildren? The elder's words carried such moral weight that even the tribal council members who had investments in the fracking company began to look uncomfortable. One by one, community members began standing to voice their support for investigating Jake's findings more thoroughly. Over the following weeks, a team of independent scientists confirmed Jake's assessment of the environmental contamination. The tribal council voted to terminate their contract with the fracking company, despite the significant financial cost. Instead, they decided to pursue the alternative development plans that Jake and Ayana had proposed, which would provide sustainable income while protecting their land and water. The children's health began improving once the fracking stopped and water purification systems were installed. Ayana's spiritual healing work helped restore their sense of safety and connection to their community. Within 3 months, all the children had recovered completely. This success story attracted national attention, and Jake and Ayana found themselves at the center of a growing movement among Native communities to develop their resources sustainably. They were invited to speak at universities, government conferences, and international forums about indigenous rights and environmental protection. 2 years after their marriage, Ayana gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah in English and Desba in Apache, meaning war, not because she would bring conflict, but because she would have the strength to fight for what was right. The little girl was born with her father's light eyes and her mother's strong will, already showing signs of the unique perspective she would inherit from both cultures. Jake officially changed his career from corporate consulting to working exclusively with Native communities on sustainable development projects. He and Ayana established a non-profit organization that trained other couples to work as bridges between traditional knowledge and modern science. Their model was replicated on dozens of reservations across the country. But perhaps their greatest achievement was proving that love could transcend cultural boundaries when it was built on genuine respect, shared values, and commitment to something larger than personal happiness. Their marriage became a symbol of hope for many people who had believed that the divisions between different communities were too deep to bridge. 5 years after Jake had stumbled upon a dying woman in the Arizona desert, he stood once again in that same location with Ayana and their young daughter. They had returned to the spot where their journey together began, now as part of Sarah's naming ceremony where she would receive her official Apache identity. "Do you ever regret the choice you made?" Ayana asked as they watched their daughter play among the red rocks where they had first met. Jake looked at his wife, then at their child, then at the vast desert landscape that had become his home. He thought about his old life in Denver, the corporate career he had abandoned, the conventional path he had rejected. None of it seemed real anymore compared to the richness and purpose he had found here. "Never," he said firmly. "Finding you in that desert wasn't just about saving your life. It was about finding my own life, my real life. The spirits knew what they were doing when they brought us together." Ayana smiled and took his hand. The spirits always know what they're doing. Sometimes it just takes humans a while to understand their wisdom. As they prepared for their daughter's ceremony, Jake reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this moment. What had started as a simple hiking trip had become a complete transformation of his identity, his purpose, and his understanding of what it meant to belong to a community. He had become not just Ayana's husband, but Beshbagoa, the metal house that sheltered and protected his adopted people. The evening ceremony began with the lighting of a sacred fire, and Jake watched as 3 generations of Apache families gathered to welcome his daughter into the tribe. Elder Ahiga, now in his 80s but still strong, would lead the blessing that would officially recognize Sarah as a full member of the Apache nation. As the stars appeared overhead and the ancient songs filled the desert air, Jake understood that this was exactly where he was meant to be. The desert that had once seemed empty and hostile now felt like the most nurturing place on earth, filled with the love of his chosen family and the wisdom of his adopted ancestors. His journey from corporate geologist to Apache medicine man's husband was complete, but his real work was just beginning. Together, he and Ayana would continue building bridges between worlds, healing both people and communities and proving that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we're willing to lose ourselves in order to find who we're really meant to become.